So I'll now share the first reading. So on concept 8, the Board of Trustees delegates full authority for routine management of Al-Anon headquarters to its executive committees. Building on the principles of trust and cooperation emphasized earlier in the concepts, Concept 8 reminds us to focus on our priorities, keeping our eyes on the bigger picture and investing our efforts in activities that will bring the greatest results. To do that, we depend upon the help that others provide on more routine matters. We don't have to cling to every detail of every job. We can let go and hand mundane matters over to others who are better suited to those tasks. In doing so, we're able to move forward in significant ways. Many of us who have been deeply affected by someone else's drinking find it difficult to give up control even over the most trivial things. We seized hold over what little we could control and were fearful of turning over some of that control to someone else. We felt that we had to do everything ourselves because we wanted everything done exactly our way. Our exaggerated sense of responsibility only brought stress and anxiety. With Concept 8, we're reminded that we have options. We don't have to take on every responsibility or attend to every detail personally. We can ask for help. As we become more comfortable with letting go of our fears, we may find that we can indeed trust in the abilities of others. In the spirit of trust and cooperation, the necessary tasks are accomplished, and we share the opportunity for growth with everyone involved. And Concept 8, the original Concept 8 from AA, the trustees of the General Service Board act in two primary capacities. A, with respect to the larger matters of overall policy and finance, they are the principal planners and administrators. They, in their primary committees, directly manage these affairs. But with respect to our separately incorporated and constantly active services, the relation of the trustees is mainly that of full stock ownership and of custodial oversight, which they exercise through their ability to elect all directors of these entities. I shall now post those in the chat for reference. There we go. So I want to talk about this firstly from the formal point of view, and then from how it can be applied as a more general principle. So the way it works in 12-step fellowships is you've got a chain of delegation going down from God through the individual consciousness of the people who are the members of the fellowship, which expresses itself in the group conscience. Groups elect GSRs or an Al-Anon group representatives, and through areas and districts. You end up at a conference which represents the whole shooting match. And I think there are three layers of decision making in let's just talk about Al-Anon. There's so-called final decision on large matters of general policy and finance. So that's the top level of decision making. So in the broadest possible sense, what we're going to do as a fellowship. But the responsibility for turning that into an action plan, which would come in the form of offices and telephone services and websites and literature and public relations and internal relations and internal publications and registration and meeting listings. All of the things that the fellowship must do as a fellowship that can't be done at group level. The actual task of putting all of that into practice is delegated to the board, which runs service corporations. And there you're not dealing with policy. Policy is decided by a conference, which represents the whole of the fellowship. The strategy is decided by the board. And the strategy is how you're going to put that policy into practical action. And then there's the minutiae. We're going to publish a book. The strategy, which is we're going to publish this book, and this is the general outline of what we're going to do. There are then 10,000 individual tasks which need to be performed for that book to actually end up on the bookshelves and being sent out and being published in whatever form it's published. So you've got three sets of decision making. There's policy, which is conference, strategy, which is the board, and everything else, operations, which is the corporations. And the way the boards tend to work, they tend to do, I think, four things. They do a few things themselves. They literally do some work themselves. It's not that their fingers never move across a keyboard and they never produce a document. They do things. They also have subcommittees. Now, those subcommittees are formed of those board members, and sometimes there'll be employees or external consultants or volunteer members of the fellowship. And then there are corporations, which do the actual running of offices and employ people and so on. And then you've got externals, so printing firms, lawyers, accountants. So you've got four ways of getting things done. You can do something yourself. You can form a subcommittee. You can have a corporation. You oversee what the corporation does, but you hire someone to run that, or you've got entirely external activities. And so as the board, I've been on subcommittees, national subcommittees, and the way it works is the board member on the subcommittee doesn't do anything. It's the committee that has to do things. But the final say resides with the board member who's chairing that subcommittee. But he has no hands, as it were. We're the ones that have to do the work. So you've got very clear lines, a distinction between policy on one hand and strategy, conference and the board, and then a second clear line between the strategy and the implementation, which is the board and the various people they delegate to. Now, in terms of my actual personal application of this, I think concept 8 is immensely important. In my life, there are almost no policy decisions which need to be made. A policy decision might be, what do I do for a living? Where do I live? What fellowship do I go to? Do I want to work a 12-step program? Those are policy decisions. The strategy would be, what particular job will I take on in my professional life? What my occupation? It's not really a professional life. Where am I going to work, and roughly how am I going to do it? And then everything else is implementation. So there's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of policy. There's a little bit of strategy, but almost everything else is implementation. I have the most appalling habit. I know you don't have any bad habits yourself, but I have many bad habits. And one of my most appalling habits is to spend all my time, rather than actually doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, but actually, no, you see, I'm so clever. I can do two things at once. I can be doing the right thing, but my mind is buzzing about something else. It can kind of think about two things at once, or at least during those activities which don't require full mental attention. And there are lots of those during the day, even just walking to the kitchen to get a cup of tea. During that time, your mind is not entirely occupied with getting the cup of tea. So it starts to work on other things. And my mind automatically shoots up to questions of strategy and policy. I remember that there was 2 or 3 year period where I spent all day, every day, pretty much thinking, I'm in the wrong job. I shouldn't be doing this job. I don't like this job. What job shall I do? I don't know what job to do. No one will give me a job. I don't like this job. I don't like the other people. I wish I had a job. I've got a job, but I don't like my job. I don't like my job. I wish I had someone else's job. I don't like their job either. I don't like any jobs. I'm a Marxist. That's that's the way it basically went all day long. I mean, can you imagine that voice in your head all day long? So I was stuck in policy and strategy. But it gets worse. So I have an occupation, which means I do some things. And if I do them, then people give me money in return. That's what an occupation is. It's very different than a career. If you want to know what a career is, go to LinkedIn and see how people relate themselves to their occupations, and you'll discover what it's the most horrific thing. I don't know if you've come across it, but it's the most horrific thing. Much nicer to have an occupation where you just do a thing and then they give you money, and then you go to a shop and you buy things with the money, or the things that you need. Very, very simple and straightforward. But in the industry in which my occupation is located, I don't just get involved in policy and strategy as far as my own life is concerned. I get involved in policy and strategy as far as the direction of the industry is going, as though I am in charge of the industry and I have opinions. And part of my mind is constantly working out precisely what my opinion is and why, just in case anyone asks me one day. No one's ever asked me, but I'm prepared, you see, prepared to let them know, and then they'll know. You see, this is like being in Al-Anon and sitting there working out what AA should do. So the message of concept 8, when I'm applying it in my life, is what I'm supposed to do is the thing that's in front of me. And if I'm called upon to engage in questions of strategy or policy, I must do so in time deliberately set aside and under the governance of my higher power. Now, some people are uh, they put their heads in stick their heads in the sand and don't think about anything at all. Might need to spend a tiny little bit more time thinking about policy and strategy. I'm the other way around. So I need to constantly, it's like having a car where the steering wheel is not properly aligned, where it has a constant drift either to the left or to the right, and you're constantly having to compensate for it. Wheelchairs are like that. Wheelchairs always either drift to the left or to the right. And after you've been pushing someone in a wheelchair for a while, one of your shoulders is going to hurt because you're constantly having to stop it drifting in the direction by exerting pressure to push it in the other direction. And it's like that with applying principles in Al-Anon. So I'm the sort of person that needs to spend less time on policy and strategy whenever I'm tempted to get out of the moment and start thinking about the bigger picture. Almost certainly not. Other people will need to put the effort in the opposite direction. Very, very occasionally, I've met people in Al-Anon who might perhaps benefit from speaking up a little more. I'm the sort of Al-Anon that needs to get my nose out of business, out of other people's business, that needs to speak up perhaps a little bit less. My voice is a familiar voice in certain circles, over familiar. Group consciences, that sort of thing. I need to bang on my drum, asserting my rights and needs and wants less. So if one knows which side one errs, one knows which side in general to lean to compensate for that. So in general, I need to lean in the direction of less self, not more self. As I said, there are a few people that need a little bit more, need to take up a little bit more, but there needs to be less of me in any room that I'm in, less of me in any situation that I'm in. And with concept 8 and its application, there needs to be a lot more factory shop floor, a lot less shop foreman, and a lot less board of directors. God's actually a lot better at directing me than I am, and if I don't lift if I never lifted a finger in terms of policy or strategy again, I think I'd probably still be all right. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.